431, chapters 41 through 43 of The Count of Monte Cristo. Book talk begins at 3:57.
Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. 431. Bonjour! This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by its listeners. Many thanks and much gratefulness to all of the listeners who have gone over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledged their support to the show. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Well, hello! It is I, Heather, and I am back from a fabulous Craftlit tour. Thank you so much for your patience while I was on the road and unable to record. I have a whole lot of coolness to share for you. There are links in the show notes to photographs, slideshows, little video thingies. All that stuff is available for you, along with some soundscapes that I recorded. But really the thing that's been on my mind to share with you, there's two. One is that we went to Victor Hugo's house, the Dumas mansion that was his Count of Monte Cristo mansion. That was a little too far out for us, but we got to Giverny, we got to Versailles, which was incredible, and there'll be more on that later. And we got to Victor Hugo's house, along with a whole mess load of other stuff. Victor Hugo's house has in it Alexandré Dumas' pen, with which he wrote his last 20 novels. The nib on this sucker is dull, as you might expect, but there's a letter that's handwritten from Dumas in the pen, and you can really tell how blobby the ink had gotten. But it's a silver pen with a silver nib. It's very pretty. And the reason they did that is because Victor Hugo's wife wanted to raise some funds for a charity. And so Dumas, Georges Sand, and Victor Hugo, and one other writer who I can't remember, they all donated their inkwells and pens and then wrote little letters. And then that was put up for auction to raise money, and nobody wanted to buy it. So Victor Hugo bought it himself, and they used his money in that case for that portion of the donation to the charity. But the thing that was really clear at several points in Victor Hugo's home was how much he and Dumas overlapped and how well they knew each other, especially by the end. They were both really fantastically famous. Victor Hugo was fantastically famous for, as you know, the kind of drama and historical fiction and big, rousing, emotionally charged historical fiction that we get with, like, Les Miserables. Dumas, because he's writing more of the popular fiction, wasn't necessarily kept at the same level as Victor Hugo. However, when François Mitterrand was in office, one of the last things he did was had Dumas exhumed and brought to the Pantheon, kind of like being buried in Westminster Abbey. If you're a writer in Britain, this was the honor that was really due to Alexandre Dumas. And finally, he was moved there and reinterred in the proper site. I will have audio for you of the speech that Mitterrand gave, but not today because we've got too much to do. And the Count of Monte Cristo. Today I am so excited because we are doing chapters 41 through 43. And they're small little chapters for the most part, but boy, is there a lot going on. Today is one of those times where we really start to see the curtain pulled away, and we can start to see little tiny glimmers of just how much work Edmund put in to his revenge. Which is kind of cool, because wow, what a genius. So a couple things to keep in mind as you listen. There's not a whole lot, but they are important. The first, at the beginning of chapter 41, you're going to hear a laundry list of artists' names. You might actually recognize a couple of them, and that's great. But for the most part, aside from the couple of famous ones, the rest of them were Dumas' friends. And he was just doing a little, PR for his friends, the artists, who needed to make a living. So he just threw them in as examples of great artists that are recognized by the Count. So that's kind of fun. So heraldry. There's a section where the Count and Albert are talking about heraldry, and it's complicated the way heraldry often is. The things I can tell you are these few things. There are two names, Hosier and Jacquot, who are mentioned. Those are guys who wrote about heraldry, like deeply researched it, and had written about it. And the other thing that appears to be happening in the emblem that they're talking about is that there are both birds and possibly a reference to the cross on this shield. This would be the Fernand side of the shield, not the Mercedes side of the shield. As far as we know, Fernand did not live in the 1300s, so him going on a crusade is probably not possible. But lots of people, evidently, put things that indicated participation in the Crusades onto their family heraldic symbols. And they do that several ways. One was by putting a cross on it. Other things are using birds to indicate that they went forth into the Crusades on wings of faith. So you're going to hear a mention of marlets and the number of marlets that you see on them. Those are probably martlets, and that might be why they're on there. You'll hear a mention of a shagreen case for salts. We've come across shagreen before. It's like a skin, like a rough skin. The only one that's coming to mind right now, which I don't think is correct, is like alligator or crocodile skin, where it's got that rough exterior. And you'll hear a mention of Manfred. Manfred is a Byronic hero. We hear the Byronic hero again. Manfred was a Byronic hero in a poem. It was never supposed to be a play. It was called a closet drama, where it's meant to be read aloud, but read aloud as a poem. It was about a guy, it was very Faustian, this guy Manfred, who was tortured by guilt, and he calls up these spirits to try and get them to assuage his guilt, and it doesn't work out very well for him. And ultimately, he manages to find a way to die, and at the end pretty much says, I defy augury, and everybody else, by the way. And he finally is allowed to die. Why does this matter for us? Because Manfred is an interesting character. At first glance, he looks like the big Byronic hero, the big, oh, you don't understand me. Mom, why don't you let me... It's hard not to think about teenagers when you think about Byronic heroes. But part of what was going on in this, you've got the big supernatural, you've got the big Gothic archetypes. You also have a guy who deep down inside is really sensitive and maybe even a good guy. And so it hurts a little bit more when he goes down. So on the one hand, we've got our Byronic hero, which the Count looks like quite often. But deep down inside, we know he's Edmond Dantes, who is this sensitive, kind, smart, and loving guy. You know, the core of who he is was Edmund. He's got all these layers of vengeance on him right now. But Dumas absolutely expected that when Manfred gets brought up, we know who he's talking about. It was treated a lot by musicians because it's so dramatic, and dramatic, romantic stuff brings you Schumann and Tchaikovsky, and that's where Manfred has lived for the most part, is within music. But it started with that poem. The Marquis de Saint-Méran. You're going to hear his name again, and it really, really, really matters that you remember who he is. Think back, way back, to the betrothal feast for Edmund. Remember how that was paralleled by a pre-wedding feast for de Villefort? Villefort's in-laws were the Marquis and Marquise de Saint-Méran. That name's going to pop up again today, later in the chapters. So just keep your ears open for that. And also remember, along with who Saint-Méran was, Abbé Busoni is Edmund. Remember, he's the one who went, the Abbé is the one who went and talked to Caderousse way back when we were dealing with Monsieur Morel and all of that. That's when we visited Abbe Busoni, and when Abbe Busoni visited Caderousse. Now, the chapters aren't very long and they aren't very difficult, but they are complex in that there are a lot of voices that go by. If you want to invest a little bit of money into an Audible book, or if you want to start a free trial of Audible at audible.com, you can do that and get B.J. Harrison's version of The Count of Monte Cristo. The work that he does in these 3 chapters, I think, is really important for laying some groundwork, but also for getting voices differentiated in your mind. And he's just, the more different books that I listen to him read, the more impressed I am with what a masterful character vocal actor he is. So if you're interested, tootle on over. There's a link in the show notes. You can go get his book there. And if you look at the length of the chapters on the Audible book, you can do a pretty good guess as to how long the chapters are here for you for free. All right, that's it. Let's listen to 41, 42, and 43 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandré Dumas.
Chapter 41. The Presentation. When Albert found himself alone with Monte Cristo, "My dear Count," said he, "allow me to commence my services as cicerone by showing you a specimen of a bachelor's apartment. You, who are accustomed to the palaces of Italy, can amuse yourself by calculating in how many square feet a young man who is not the worst lodged in Paris can live. As we pass from one room to another, I will open the windows to let you breathe." Monte Cristo had already seen the breakfast-room and the salon on the ground floor. Albert led him first to his atelier, which was, as we have said, his favourite apartment. Monte Cristo quickly appreciated all that Albert had collected here: old cabinets, Japanese porcelain, Oriental stuffs, Venetian glass, arms from all parts of the world. Everything was familiar to him, and at first glance he recognized their date, their country, and their origin. Morcerf had expected he should be the guide. On the contrary, it was he who, under the Count's guidance, followed a course of archaeology, mineralogy, and natural history. They descended to the first floor. Albert led his guest into the salon. The salon was filled with the works of modern artists. There were landscapes by Dupré, with their long reeds and tall trees, their lowing oxen and marvellous skies; Delacroix's Arabian cavaliers, with their long white burnouses, their shining belts, their damasked arms, their horses, who tore each other with their teeth while their riders contended fiercely with their maces; aquarelles of Boulanger, representing Notre-Dame de Paris with that vigour that makes the artist the rival of the poet. There were paintings by Diaz, who makes his flowers more beautiful than flowers, his suns more brilliant than the sun; designs by Decamps, as vividly coloured as those of Salvator Rosa, but more poetic; pastels by Giraud and Müller, representing children like angels, and women with the features of a virgin; sketches torn from the album of Dosat's Travels in the East, that had been made in a few seconds on the saddle of a camel or beneath the dome of a mosque. In a word, all that modern art can give in exchange and as recompense for the art lost and gone with ages long since past. Albert expected to have something new this time to show to the traveller, but to his great surprise, the latter, without seeking for the signatures, many of which indeed were only initials, named instantly the author of every picture in such a manner that it was easy to see that each name was not only known to him, but that each style associated with it had been appreciated and studied by him. From the salon they passed into the bedchamber. It was a model of taste and simple elegance. A single portrait, signed by Leopold Robert, shone in its carved and gilded frame. This portrait attracted the Count of Monte Cristo's attention, for he made 3 rapid steps in the chamber and stopped suddenly before it. It was the portrait of a young woman of 5 or 26, with a dark complexion, and light and lustrous eyes, veiled beneath long lashes. She wore the picturesque costume of the Catalan fisherwoman, a red and black bodice, and golden pins in her hair. She was looking at the sea, and her form was outlined on the blue ocean and sky. The light was so faint in the room that Albert did not perceive the pallor that spread itself over the Count's visage, or the nervous heaving of his chest and shoulders. Silence prevailed for an instant, during which Monte Cristo gazed intently on the picture. "You have there a most charming mistress, Viscount," said the Count in a perfectly calm tone. "And this costume, a ball costume, doubtless becomes her admirably." "Ah, monsieur," returned Albert, "I would never forgive you this mistake if you had seen another picture besides this. You do not know my mother. She it is whom you see here. She had her portrait painted thus 6 or 8 years ago. This costume is a fancy one, it appears, and the resemblance is so great that I think I shall see my mother the same as she was in 1830. The Countess had this portrait painted during the Count's absence. She doubtless intended giving him an agreeable surprise, but, strange to say, this portrait seemed to displease my father, and the value of the picture, which is, as you see, one of the best works of Leopold Robert, could not overcome his dislike to it. It is true, between ourselves, that Monsieur de Morcerf is one of the most assiduous peers at Luxembourg, a general renowned for theory, but a most mediocre amateur of art. It is different with my mother, who paints exceedingly well, and who, unwilling to part with so valuable a picture, gave it to me to put here, where it would be less likely to displease Monsieur de Morcerf, whose portrait, by Gros, I will also show you. Excuse my talking of family matters, but as I shall have the honour of introducing you to the Count, I tell you this to prevent you making any allusions to this picture. The picture seems to have a malign influence, for my mother rarely comes here without looking at it, and still more rarely does she look at it without weeping. This disagreement is the only one that has ever taken place between the Count and Countess, who are still as much united, although married more than 20 years, as on the first day of their wedding." Monte Cristo glanced rapidly at Albert, as if to seek a hidden meaning in his words, but it was evident the young man uttered them in the simplicity of his heart. "Now," said Albert, "that you have seen all my treasures, allow me to offer them to you, unworthy as they are. Consider yourself as in your own house, and to put yourself still more at your ease, pray accompany me to the apartments of Monsieur de Morcerf, he whom I wrote from Rome an account of the services you rendered me, and to whom I announced your promised visit. And I may say that both the Count and Countess anxiously desire to thank you in person. You are somewhat blasé, I know, and family scenes have not much effect on Sinbad the sailor, who has seen so many others. However, accept what I propose to you as an initiation into Parisian life, a life of politeness, visiting, and introductions." Monte Cristo bowed without making any answer. He accepted the offer without enthusiasm and without regret, as one of those conventions of society which every gentleman looks upon as a duty. Albert summoned his servant and ordered him to acquaint Monsieur and Madame de Morcerf of the arrival of the Count of Monte Cristo. Albert followed him with the Count. When they arrived at the antechamber, above the door was visible a shield, which by its rich ornaments and its harmony with the rest of the furniture indicated the importance the owner attached to this blason. Monte Cristo stopped and examined it attentively. "Asia 7 merlets, or placed bender," said he. "These are doubtless your family arms. Except the knowledge of blasons that enables me to decipher them, I am very ignorant of heraldry. I, a count of a fresh creation, fabricated in Tuscany by the aid of a commandery of St. Stephen, and who would not have taken the trouble had I not been told that when you travel much it is necessary. Besides, you must have something on the panels of your carriage to escape being searched by the custom-house officers. Excuse my putting such a question to you." "It is not indiscreet," returned Morcerf, with the simplicity of conviction. "You have guessed rightly. These are our arms, that is, those of my father. But they are, as you see, joined to another shield, which has Jules, a silver tower which are my mother's. By her side I am Spanish, but the family of Morcerf is French, and I have heard, one of the oldest of the south of France. Yes, replied Monte Cristo, these blasons prove that almost all the armed pilgrims that went to the Holy Land took for their arms either a cross in honour of their mission, or birds of passage in sign of the long voyage they were about to undertake, and which they hoped to accomplish on the wings of faith. One of your ancestors had joined the Crusades, and supposing it to be only that of St. Louis, that makes you mount to the 13th century, which is tolerably ancient. It is possible, said Morcerf. My father has in his study a genealogical tree which will tell you all that, and on which I made commentaries that would have greatly edified Osier and Jaucourt. At present I no longer think of it, and yet I must tell you that we are beginning to occupy ourselves greatly with these things under our popular government. Well, then, your government would do well to choose from the past something better than the things that I have noticed on your monuments, and which have no heraldic meaning whatever. As for you, Viscount, continued Monte Cristo to Morcerf, you are more fortunate than the government, for your arms are really beautiful and speak to the imagination. Yes, you are at once from Provence and Spain. That explains if the portrait you showed me be like the dark hue I so much admired on the visage of the noble Catalan. It would have required the penetration of Oedipus or the Sphinx to have divined the irony the Count concealed beneath these words, apparently uttered with the greatest politeness. Morcerf thanked him with a smile and pushed open the door above which were his arms, and which, as we have said, opened into the salon. In the most conspicuous part of the salon was another portrait. It was that of a man, from 5 to 38, in the uniform of a general officer, wearing the double epaulette of heavy bullion that indicates superior rank, the ribbon of the Legion of Honour around his neck, which showed he was a commander, and on the right breast the star of a Grand Officer of the Order of the Saviour, and on the left that of the Grand Cross of Charles III, which proved that the person represented by the picture had served in the wars of Greece and Spain, or what was just the same thing as regarded decorations, had fulfilled some diplomatic mission in the two countries. Monte Cristo was engaged in examining this portrait with no less care than he had bestowed upon the other, when another door opened, and he found himself opposite to the Count of Morcerf in person. He was a man of 40 to 45 years, but he seemed at least 50, and his black moustache and eyebrows contrasted strangely with his almost white hair, which was cut short in the military fashion. He was dressed in plain clothes, and wore at his buttonhole the ribbons of the different orders to which he belonged. He entered with a tolerably dignified step, and some little haste. Monte Cristo saw him advance towards him without making a single step. It seemed as if his feet were rooted to the ground, and his eyes on the Count of Morcerf. "Father," said the young man, "I have the honour of presenting to you the Count of Monte Cristo, the generous friend whom I had the good fortune to meet in the critical situation of which I have told you." "You are most welcome, monsieur," said the Count of Morcerf, saluting Monte Cristo with a smile. "And monsieur has rendered our house in preserving its only heir a service which ensures him our eternal gratitude." As he said these words, the Count of Morcerf pointed to a chair, while he seated himself in another opposite the window. Monte Cristo, in taking the seat Morcerf offered him, placed himself in such a manner as to remain concealed in the shadow of the large velvet curtains, and read on the careworn and livid features of the Count a whole history of secret griefs written in each wrinkle time had planted there. "The Countess," said Morcerf, "was at her toilette when she was informed of the visit she was about to receive. She will, however, be in the salon in 10 minutes." "It is a great honour to me," returned Monte Cristo, "to be thus, on the first day of my arrival in Paris, brought in contact with a man whose merit equals his reputation, and to whom fortune has for once been equitable. But has she not still on the plains of Metige, or in the mountains of Atlas, a marshal's staff to offer you?" "Oh," replied Morcerf, reddening slightly, I have left the service, monsieur. Made a peer at the Restoration, I served through the first campaign under the orders of Marshal Bourmont. I could, therefore, expect a higher rank, and who knows what might have happened had the elder branch remained on the throne. But the Revolution of July was, it seems, sufficiently glorious to allow itself to be ungrateful, and it was so for all services that did not date from the imperial period. I tendered my resignation, for when you have gained your epaulettes on the battlefield, you do not know how to manoeuvre on the slippery grounds of the salon. I have hung up my sword and cast myself into politics. I have devoted myself to industry. I studied the useful arts. During the 20 years I served, I often wished to do so, but I had not the time.
These are the ideas that render your nation superior to any other, returned Monte Cristo. A gentleman of high birth, possessor of an ample fortune. You have consented to gain your promotion as an obscure soldier, step by step. This is uncommon. Then become general, peer of France, commander of the Legion of Honour. You consent to again commence a second apprenticeship, without any other hope of any other desire than that of one day becoming useful to your fellow creatures. This indeed is praiseworthy. Nay, more, it is sublime. Albert looked on and listened with astonishment. He was not used to see Monte Cristo give vent to such bursts of enthusiasm. "Alas," continued the stranger, doubtless to dispel the slight cloud that covered Morcerf's brow, "we do not act thus in Italy. We grow according to our race and our species, and we pursue the same lines and often the same uselessness all our lives."
"But, monsieur," said the Count of Morcerf, "for a man of your merit, Italy is not a country, and France opens her arms to receive you. Respond to her call. France will not, perhaps, be always ungrateful. She treats her children ill, but she always welcomes strangers."
"Ah, father," said Albert with a smile, "it is evident you do not know the Count of Monte Cristo. He despises all honours and contents himself with those written on his passport." "That is the most just remark," replied the stranger, "I have ever heard made concerning myself."
"You have been free to choose your career," observed the Count of Morcerf with a sigh, "and you have chosen the path strewed with flowers."
"Precisely, monsieur," replied Monte Cristo with one of those smiles that a painter could never represent or a physiologist analyze.
"If I did not fear to fatigue you," said the general, evidently charmed with the Count's manners, "I would have taken you to the chamber. There is a debate very curious to those who are strangers to our modern senators."
"I shall be most grateful, monsieur, if you will at some future time renew your offer. But I have been flattered with the hope of being introduced to the Countess, and I will therefore wait." "Ah, here is my mother," cried the Viscount. Monte Cristo turned round hastily and saw Madame de Morcerf at the entrance of the salon, at the door opposite to that by which her husband had entered, pale and motionless. When Monte Cristo turned around, she let fall her arm, which for some unknown reason had been resting on the gilded door-post. She had been there some moments, and had heard the last words of the visitor. The latter rose and bowed to the Countess, who inclined herself without speaking. "Ah, good heavens, madame," said the Count. "Are you ill, or is it the heat of the room that affects you?" "Are you ill, mother?" cried the Viscount, springing towards her. She thanked them both with a smile. "No," returned she, "but I feel some emotion on seeing for the first time the man without whose intervention we should have been in tears and desolation, monsieur," continued the Countess, advancing with the majesty of a queen. "I owe to you the life of my son, and for this I bless you. Now I thank you for the pleasure you give me in thus affording me the opportunity of thanking you,
as I have blessed you, from the bottom of my heart." The Count bowed again, but lower than before. He was even paler than Mercédès. "Madame," said he, "the Count and yourself recompense too generously a simple action. To save a man, to spare a father's feelings, or a mother's sensibility, is not to do a good action, but a simple deed of humanity." At these words, uttered with the most exquisite sweetness and politeness, Madame de Morcerf replied, "It is very fortunate for my son, monsieur, that he found such a friend, and I thank God that things are thus." And Mercédès raised her fine eyes to heaven with so fervent an expression of gratitude that the Count fancied he saw tears in them. Monsieur de Morcerf approached her. "Madame," said he, "I have already made my excuses to the Count for quitting him, and I pray you to do so also. The sitting commences at 2. It is now 3, and I am to speak." "Go then, and monsieur and I will strive our best to forget your absence," replied the Countess, with the same tone of deep feeling. "Monsieur," continued she, turning to Monte Cristo, "will you do us the honour of passing the rest of the day with us?" "Believe me, madam, I feel most grateful for your kindness, but I go out of my travelling carriage at your door this morning, and I am ignorant how I am installed in Paris, which I scarcely know. This is but a trifling inquietude, I know, but one that may be appreciated." "We shall have the pleasure another time," said the Countess. "You promise that?" Monte Cristo inclined himself without answering, but the gesture might pass for assent. "I will not detain you, monsieur," continued the Countess. "I would not have our gratitude become indiscreet or importunate." "My dear Count," said Albert, "I will endeavour to return your politeness at Rome and place my coupe at your disposal until your own be ready." "A thousand thanks for your kindness, Viscount," returned the Count of Monte Cristo, "but I suppose that Monsieur Bertuccio has suitably employed the 4 hours and a half I have given him, and that I shall find a carriage of some sort ready at the door." Albert was used to the Count's manner of proceeding. He knew that, like Nero, he was in search of the impossible, and nothing astonished him. But wishing to judge with his own eyes how far the Count's orders had been executed, he accompanied him to the door of the house. Monte Cristo was not deceived. As soon as he appeared in the Count of Morcerf's antechamber, a footman, the same who at Rome had brought the Count's card to the 2 young men and announced his visit, sprang into the vestibule, and when he arrived at the door the illustrious traveller found his carriage awaiting him. It was a coupe of Collar's building, and with horses and harness for which Drake had, to the knowledge of all the lions of Paris, refused on the previous day 700 guineas. "Monsieur," said the Count to Albert, "I do not ask you to accompany me to my house, as I can only show you a habitation fitted up in a hurry, and I have, as you know, a reputation to keep as regards not being taken by surprise. Give me, therefore, 1 more day before I invite you. I shall then be certain not to fall in my hospitality." "If you ask me for a day, Count, I know what to anticipate. It will not be a house I shall see, but a palace. You have decidedly some genius at your control." "Ma foi, spread that idea," replied the Count of Monte Cristo, putting his foot on the velvet-lined steps of his splendid carriage, "and that will be worth something to me among the ladies." As he spoke he sprang into the vehicle. The door was closed, but not so rapidly that Monte Cristo failed to perceive the almost imperceptible movement which stirred the curtains of the apartment in which he had left Madame de Morcerf. When Albert returned to his mother, he found her in the boudoir reclining in a large velvet armchair, the whole room so obscure that only the shining spangle, fastened here and there to the drapery, and the angles of the gilded frames of the pictures showed with some degree of brightness in the gloom. Albert could not see the face of the Countess, as it was covered with a thin veil she had put on her head, and which fell over her features in misty folds. But it seemed to him as though her voice had altered. He could distinguish amid the perfumes of the roses and the heliotropes in the flower stands the sharp and fragrant odour of volatile salts, and he noticed in one of the chased cups on the mantelpiece the Countess's smelling bottle, taken from its shagreen case, and exclaimed in a tone of uneasiness as he entered, "My dear mother, have you been ill during my absence?" "No, no, Albert. But you know these roses, tuberoses, and orange flowers throw out first before one is used to them such violent perfumes." "Then, my dear mother," said Albert, putting his hand to the bell, "they must be taken into the antechamber. You are really ill, and just now were so pale as you came into the room." "Was I pale, Albert?" "Yes, a pallor that suits you admirably, mother, but which did not the less alarm my father and myself." "Did your father speak of it?" inquired Mercédès eagerly. "No, madame, but do you not remember that he spoke of the fact to you?" "Yes, I do remember," replied the Countess. A servant entered, summoned by Albert's ring of the bell. "Take these flowers into the anteroom or dressing-room," said the Viscount. "They make the Countess ill." The footman obeyed his orders. A long pause ensued, which lasted until all the flowers were removed. "What is this name of Monte Cristo?" inquired the Countess, when the servant had taken away the last vase of flowers. "Is it a family name, or the name of the estate, or a simple title?" "I believe, mother, it is merely a title. The Count purchased an island in the Tuscan archipelago, and, as he told you today, has founded a commandery. You know the same thing was done for St. Stephen of Florence, St. George Constantinian of Parma, and even for the Order of Malta. Except this, he has no pretension to nobility, and calls himself a chance count, although the general opinion at Rome is that the Count is a man of very high distinction." "His manners are admirable," said the Countess, "at least as far as I could judge, in the few minutes he remained there." "They are perfect, mother, so perfect that they surpass by far all I have known in the leading aristocracy of the three proudest nobilities of Europe, the English, the Spanish, and the German." The Countess paused a moment. Then, after a slight hesitation, she resumed, "You have seen, my dear Albert, I ask the question as a mother. You have seen Monsieur de Monte Cristo in his house. You are quick-sighted, have much knowledge of the world, more tact than is usual at your age. Do you think the Count is really what he appears to be?" "What does he appear to be?" "Why, you have just said, a man of high distinction." "I told you, my dear mother, he was esteemed such." "But what is your opinion, Albert?" "I must tell you that I have not come to any decided opinion respecting him, but I think him a Maltese." "I do not ask you of his origin, but what he is." "Ah, what he is, that is quite another thing. I have seen so many remarkable things in him that if you would have me really say what I think, I shall reply that I really do look upon him as one of Byron's heroes, whom misery has marked with a fatal brand. Some Manfred, some Lara, some Werner, one of those wrecks, as it were, of some ancient family, who, disinherited of their patrimony, have achieved won by the force of their adventurous genius, which has placed them above the laws of society." "You say?" "I say that Monte Cristo is an island in the midst of Mediterranean without inhabitants or garrison, the resort of smugglers of all nations and pirates of every flag. Who knows whether or not these industrious worthies do not pay to their feudal lord some dues for his protection?" "That is possible," said the Countess, reflecting. "Never mind," continued the young man. "Smuggler or not, you must agree, mother dear, as you have seen him, that the Count of Monte Cristo is a remarkable man, who will have the greatest success in the salons of Paris. Why, this very morning, in my rooms, he made his entrée amongst us by striking every man of us with amazement, not even excepting Chateau Renaud." "And what do you suppose is the Count's age?" inquired Mercédès, evidently attaching great importance to this question. 35 or 36, mother. So young? It is impossible, said Mercedes, replying at the same time to what Albert said, as well as to her own private reflection. It is the truth, however. 3 or 4 times he has said to me, and certainly without the slightest premeditation, "At such a period I was 5 years old, at another 10 years old, at another 12, and I, induced by curiosity which kept me alive to these details, have compared the dates and never found him inaccurate. The age of this singular man, who is of no age, is then, I am certain, 35. Besides, mother, remark how vivid his eye, how raven-black his hair, and his brow, though so pale, is free from wrinkles. He is not only vigorous, but also young." The Countess bent her head as if beneath a heavy wave of bitter thoughts. "And has this man displayed a friendship for you, Albert?" she asked with a nervous shudder. "I am inclined to think so." "And do you like him?" "Why, he pleases me in spite of Franz d'Épinay, who tries to convince me that he is a being returned from the other world." The Countess shuddered. "Albert," she said in a voice which was altered by emotion, "I have always put on you your guard against new acquaintances. Now you are a man and are able to give me advice. Yet I repeat to you, Albert, be prudent." "Why, my dear mother? It is necessary, in order to make your advice turn to account, that I should know beforehand what I have to distrust. The Count never plays. He only drinks pure water tinged with a little sherry, and is so rich that he cannot, without intending to laugh at me, try to borrow money. What, then, have I to fear from him?" "You are right," said the Countess, "and my fears are weakness, especially when directed against a man who has saved your life. How did your father receive him, Albert? It is necessary that we should be more than complaisant to the Count. Monsieur de Morcerf is sometimes occupied. His business makes him reflective, and he might, without intending it—" "Nothing could be in better taste than my father's demeanour, madame," said Albert. "Nay, more, he is seemingly greatly flattered at 2 or 3 compliments which the Count very skilfully and agreeably paid him, with as much ease as if he had known him these 30 years. Each of these little tickling arrows must have pleased my father," added Albert with a laugh, "and thus they parted the best possible friends. And Monsieur de Morcerf even wished to take him to the chamber to hear the speakers." The Countess made no reply. She fell into so deep a reverie that her eyes gradually closed. The young man, standing up before her, gazed upon her with that filial affection which is so tender and endearing with children whose mothers are still young and handsome. Then, after seeing her eyes closed and hearing her breathe gently, he believed she had dropped asleep, and left the apartment on tiptoe, closing the door after him with the utmost precaution. "This devil of a fellow," he uttered, shaking his head. "I said at the time he would create a sensation here, and I measure his effect by an infallible thermometer. My mother has noticed him, and he must therefore perforce be remarkable." He went down to the stables, not without some slight annoyance, when he remembered that the Count of Monte Cristo had laid his hands on a turnout, which sent his bays down to second place in the opinion of connoisseurs. "Most decidedly," said he, "men are not equal, and I must beg my father to develop this theorem in the Chamber of Peers." End of chapter 41. Chapter 42. Monsieur Bertuccio. Meanwhile the Count had arrived at his house. It had taken him 6 minutes to perform the distance, but these 6 minutes were sufficient to induce 20 young men, who knew the price of the equipage they had been unable to purchase themselves, to put their horses in a gallop in order to see the rich foreigner who could afford to give 20,000 francs apiece for his horses. The house Ali had chosen, and which was to serve as a town residence to Monte Cristo, was situated on the right hand as you ascend the Champs-Élysées. A thick clump of trees and shrubs rose in the centre, and masked a portion of the front. Around this shrubbery 2 alleys, like 2 arms, extended right and left, and formed a carriage drive from the iron gates to a double portico, on every step of which stood a porcelain vase filled with flowers. This house, isolated from the rest, had besides the main entrance another in the Rue Fonthieu. Even before the coachman had hailed the concierge, the massy gates rolled on their hinges. They had seen the Count coming, and at Paris, as everywhere else, he was served with the rapidity of lightning. The coachman entered and traversed the half-circle without slackening his speed, and the gates were closed ere the wheels had ceased to sound on the gravel. The carriage stopped at the left side of the portico. 2 men presented themselves at the carriage window. The one was Ali, who, smiling with an expression of the most sincere joy, seemed amply repaid by a mere look from Monte Cristo. The other bowed respectfully, and offered his arm to assist the Count in descending. "Thanks, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, springing lightly up the 3 steps of the portico. "And the notary?" "He is in the small salon, Excellency," returned Bertuccio. "And the cards I ordered to be engraved as soon as you knew the number of the house." "Your Excellency, it is done already. I have been myself to the best engraver of the Palais Royal, who did the plate in my presence. The first card struck off was taken, according to your orders, to the Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chaussée d'Autun, Numéro 7. The others are on the mantelpiece of your Excellency's bedroom." "Good. What o'clock is it?" 4 o'clock. Monte Cristo gave his hat, cane, and gloves to the same French footman who had called his carriage at the Count of Morcerf's, and then he passed into the small salon, preceded by Bertuccio, who showed him the way. "These are but indifferent marbles in this antechamber," said Monte Cristo. "I trust all this will soon be taken away." Bertuccio bowed. As the steward had said, the notary awaited him in the small salon. He was a simple-looking lawyer's clerk, elevated to the extraordinary dignity of a provincial scrivener. "You are the notary empowered to sell the country house that I wish to purchase, monsieur?" asked Monte Cristo. "Yes, Count," returned the notary. "Is the deed of sale ready?" "Yes, Count." "Have you bought it?" "Here it is." "Very well. And where is this house that I purchase?" asked the Count carelessly, addressing himself half to Bertuccio, half to the notary. The steward made a gesture that signified, "I do not know." The notary looked at the Count with astonishment. "What?" said he. "Does not the Count know where the house he purchased is situated?" "No," returned the Count. "The Count does not know?" "How should I know? I have arrived from Cadiz this morning. I have never before been at Paris, and it is the first time I have ever set foot in France." "Ah, this is different. The house you purchased is at Auteuil." At these words Bertuccio turned pale. "And where is Auteuil?" asked the Count. "Close by here, monsieur," replied the notary. "A little beyond Passy. A charming situation in the heart of the Bois de Boulogne." "So near as that," said the Count. "But that is not in the country. What made you choose a house at the gates of Paris, Monsieur Bertuccio?" "I," cried the steward with a strange expression, "His Excellency did not charge me to purchase this house. If His Excellency will recollect, if he will think—" "Ah, true," observed Monte Cristo. "I recollect now. I read the advertisement in one of the papers, and was tempted by the false title, 'A Country House.'" "It is not yet too late," cried Bertuccio eagerly, "and if your Excellency will entrust me with the commission, I will find you a better at Enghien, or Fontenay-aux-Roses, or at Bellevue." "Oh, no," returned Monte Cristo negligently. "Since I have this, I will keep it." "And you are quite right," said the notary, who feared to lose his fee. "It is a charming place, well supplied with spring water and fine trees, a comfortable habitation, although abandoned for a long time without reckoning the furniture which, although old, is yet valuable. Now that old things are so much sought after, I suppose the Count has the tastes of the day." "To be sure," returned Monte Cristo. "It is very convenient, then." "It is more. It is magnificent." "Peste! Let us not lose such an opportunity," returned Monte Cristo. "The deed, if you please, Mr. Notary." And he signed it rapidly, after having first run his eye over that part of the deed in which were specified the situation of the house and the names of the proprietors. "Bertuccio," said he, "give 55,000 francs to monsieur." The steward left the room with a faltering step, and returned with a bundle of bank-notes, which the notary counted like a man who never gives a receipt for money until after he is sure it is all there. "And now," demanded the Count, "are all the forms complied with?" "All, sir." "Have you the keys?" "They are in the hands of the concierge, who takes care of the house, but here is the order I have given him to install the Count in his new possession." "Very well," said Monte Cristo, making a sign with his hand to the notary, which said, "I have no further need of you. You may go." "But," observed the honest notary, "the Count is, I think, mistaken. It is only 50,000 francs, everything included." "And your fee?" "Is included in the sum." "But have you not come from Auteuil here?" "Yes, certainly." "Well, then, it is but fair that you should be paid for your loss of time and trouble," said the Count, and he made a gesture of polite dismissal. The notary left the room backwards, and bowing down to the ground. It was the first time he had ever met a similar client. "See this gentleman out," said the Count to Bertuccio, and the steward followed the notary out of the room. Scarcely was the Count alone when he drew from his pocket a book closed with a lock, and opened it with a key which he wore round his neck, and which never left him. After having sought for a few minutes, he stopped at a leaf which had several notes, and compared them with the deed of sale which lay on the table. "Auteuil, Rue de la Fontaine, numéro 28. "It is indeed the same," said he. "And now, am I to rely upon an avowal extorted by religious or physical terror? However, in an hour I shall know all, Bertuccio," cried he, striking a light hammer with a pliant handle on a small gong. "Bertuccio!" The steward appeared at the door. "Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, "did you never tell me that you had travelled in France?" "In some parts of France, yes, Excellency." "You know the environs of Paris, then?" "No, Excellency, no," returned the steward with a sort of nervous trembling which Monte Cristo, a connoisseur in all emotions, rightly attributed to great disquietude. "It is unfortunate," returned he, "that you have never visited the environs, for I wish to see my new property this evening, and had you gone with me, you could have given me some useful information." "To Auteuil?" cried Bertuccio, whose copper complexion became livid. I go to Auteuil? Well, what is there surprising in that? When I live at Auteuil, you must come there as you belong to my service." Bertuccio hung down his head before the imperious look of his master, and remained motionless, without making any answer. "Why, what has happened to you? Are you going to make me ring a second time for the carriage?" asked Monte Cristo in the same tone that Louis XIV pronounced the famous "I have been almost obliged to wait." Bertuccio made but one bound to the antechamber, and cried in a hoarse voice, "His Excellency's horses!" Monte Cristo wrote 2 or 3 notes, and as he sealed the last, the steward appeared. "Your Excellency's carriage is at the door," said he. "Well, take your hat and gloves," returned Monte Cristo. "Am I to accompany you, your Excellency?" cried Bertuccio. "Certainly. You must give the orders, for I intend residing at the house." It was unexampled for a servant of the Count's to dare to dispute an order of his. So the steward, without saying a word, followed his master, who got into the carriage and signed to him to follow, which he did, taking his place respectfully on the front seat. End of chapter 42. Chapter 43. The House at Auteuil. Monte Cristo noticed, as they descended the staircase, that Bertuccio signed himself in the Corsican manner, that is, had formed the sign of the cross in the air with his thumb, and as he seated himself in the carriage, muttered a short prayer. Anyone but a man of exhaustless thirst for knowledge would have had pity on seeing the steward's extraordinary repugnance for the Count's projected drive without the walls, but the Count was too curious to let Bertuccio off from this little journey. In 20 minutes they were at Auteuil. The steward's emotion had continued to augment as they entered the village. Bertuccio, crouched in the corner of the carriage, began to examine with a feverish anxiety every house they passed. "Tell them to stop at the Rue de la Fontaine, numero 28, said the Count, fixing his eyes on the steward, to whom he gave this order. Bertuccio's forehead was covered with perspiration. However, he obeyed, and leaning out of the window he cried to the coachman, "Rue de la Fontaine, numero 28." Number 28 was situated at the extremity of the village. During the drive night had set in, and darkness gave the surroundings the artificial appearance of a scene on the stage. The carriage stopped. The footman sprang off the box and opened the door. "Well," said the Count, "you do not get out, Monsieur Bertuccio. You are going to stay in the carriage, then? What are you thinking of this evening?" Bertuccio sprang out and offered his shoulder to the Count, who this time leaned upon it as he descended the 3 steps of the carriage. "Knock," said the Count, "and announce me." Bertuccio knocked, the door opened, and the concierge appeared. "What is it?" asked he. "It is your new master, my good fellow," said the footman, and he held out to the concierge the notary's order. "The house is sold, then?" demanded the concierge. "And this gentleman is coming to live here?" "Yes, my friend," returned the Count, "and I will endeavour to give you no cause to regret your old master." "Oh, monsieur," said the concierge, "I shall not have much cause to regret him, for he came here but seldom. It is 5 years since he was here last, and he did well to sell the house, for it did not bring him in anything at all." "What was the name of your old master?" said Monte Cristo. "The Marquis of Saint-Méran. I am sure he has not sold the house for what he gave for it." "The Marquis of Saint-Méran," returned the Count. "The name is not unknown to me. The Marquis of Saint-Méran," and he appeared to meditate. "An old gentleman," continued the concierge, "a staunch follower of the Bourbons. He had an only daughter who married Monsieur de Villefort, who had been the king's attorney at Nîmes, and afterwards at Versailles." Monte Cristo glanced at Bertuccio, who became whiter than the wall against which he leaned to prevent himself from falling. "And is not this daughter dead?" demanded Monte Cristo. "I fancy I have heard so." "Yes, monsieur, 21 years ago, and since then we have not seen the poor Marquis 3 times." "Thanks, thanks," said Monte Cristo, judging from the steward's utter prostration that he could not stretch the cord further without danger of breaking it. "Give me a light." "Shall I accompany you, monsieur?" "No, it is unnecessary. Bertuccio will show me a light." And Monte Cristo accompanied these words by the gift of 2 gold pieces, which produced a torrent of thanks and blessings from the concierge. "Ah, monsieur," said he, after having vainly searched on the mantelpiece and the shelves, "I have not got any candles." "Take one of the carriage lamps, Bertuccio," said the Count, "and show me the apartments." The steward obeyed in silence, but it was easy to see, from the manner in which the hand that held the light trembled, how much it cost him to obey. They went over a tolerably large ground floor. The second floor consisted of a salon, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. Near one of the bedrooms they came to a winding staircase that led down to the garden. "Ah, here is a private staircase," said the Count. "That is convenient. Light me, Monsieur Bertuccio. It leads to the garden." "And pray, how do you know that?" "It ought to do so, at least." "Well, let us be sure of that." Bertuccio sighed, and went on first. The stairs did indeed lead to the garden. At the outer door the steward paused. "Go on, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count. But he who was addressed stood there stupefied, bewildered, stunned. His haggard eyes glanced around as if in search of the traces of some terrible event, and with his clinched hands he seemed striving to shut out horrible recollections. "Well?" insisted the Count. "No, no!" cried Bertuccio, settling down the lantern at the angle of the interior wall. "No, monsieur, it is impossible. I can go no further." "What does this mean?" demanded the irresistible voice of Monte Cristo. "Why, you must see, your Excellency," cried the steward, "that this is not natural, that, having a house to purchase, you purchase it exactly at Auteuil, and that, purchasing it at Auteuil, this house should be number 28, Rue de la Fontaine. Oh, why did I not tell you all? I am sure you would not have forced me to come. I hoped your house would have been some other one than this, as if there was not another house at Auteuil than that of the assassination." "What? What?" cried Monte Cristo, stopping suddenly. "What words do you utter? Devil of a man, Corsican that you are, always mysterious or superstitious. Come, take the lantern, and let us visit the garden. You are not afraid of ghosts with me, I hope." Bertuccio raised the lantern and obeyed. The door, as it opened, disclosed a gloomy sky in which the moon strove vainly to struggle through a sea of clouds that covered her with billows of vapour, which she illumined for an instant, only to sink into obscurity. The steward wished to turn to the left. "No, no, monsieur," said Monte Cristo. "What is the use of following the alleys? Here is a beautiful lawn. Let us go on straight, forwards." Bertuccio wiped the perspiration from his brow, but obeyed. However, he continued to take the left hand. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, took the right hand. Arrived near a clump of trees, he stopped. The steward could not restrain himself. "More, monsieur, move away. I entreat you. You are exactly on the spot." "What spot?" "Where he fell." "My dear Monsieur Bertuccio," said Monte Cristo, laughing, "control yourself. We are not at Sartène or at Corte. This is not a Corsican arbour, but an English garden. Badly kept, I own, but still you must not calumniate it for that." "Monsieur, I implore you, do not stay here." "I think you are going mad, Bertuccio," said the Count coldly. "If that is the case, I warn you, I shall have you put in a lunatic asylum." "Alas, Excellency," returned Bertuccio, joining his hands and shaking his head in a manner that would have excited the Count's laughter, had not thoughts of a superior interest occupied him, and rendered him attentive to the least revelation of this timorous conscience. "Alas, Excellency, the evil has arrived." "Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, "I am very glad to tell you that while you gesticulate, you wring your hands and roll your eyes like a man possessed by a devil who will not leave him, and I have always observed that the devil most obstinate to be expelled is a secret. I knew you were a Corsican. I knew you were gloomy and always brooding over some old history of the vendetta, and I overlooked that in Italy, because in Italy those things are thought nothing of. But in France they are considered in very bad taste. There are gendarmes who occupy themselves with such affairs, judges who condemn, and scaffolds which avenge." Bertuccio clasped his hands, and as in all these evolutions he did not let fall the lantern, the light showed his pale and altered countenance. Monte Cristo examined him with the same look that at Rome he had bent upon the execution of Andrea, and then in a tone that made a shudder pass through the veins of the poor steward. "The Abbé Busoni then told me an untruth," said he, "when after his journey in France in 1829 he sent you to me with a letter of recommendation. in which he enumerated all your valuable qualities. Well, I shall write to the abbe. I shall hold him responsible for his protégé's misconduct, and I shall soon know all about this assassination. Only I warn you that when I reside in a country, I conform to all its code, and I have no wish to put myself within the compass of the French laws for your sake."
"Oh, do not do that, Excellency. I have always served you faithfully," cried Bertuccio in despair. "I have always been an honest man, and as far as lay in my power, I have done good."
"I do not deny it," returned the Count. "But why are you thus agitated? It is a bad sign. A quiet conscience does not occasion such paleness in the cheeks and such fever in the hands of a man."
"But, your Excellency," replied Bertuccio hesitatingly, "did not the Abbé Busoni, who heard my confession in the prison at Nîmes, tell you that I had a heavy burden upon my conscience?"
"Yes, but as he said, you would make an excellent steward. I concluded you had stolen, that was all."
"Oh, your Excellency," returned Bertuccio in deep contempt.
"Or, as you are a Corsican, that you had been unable to resist the desire of making a stiff, as you call it."
"Yes, my good master," cried Bertuccio, casting himself at the Count's feet. "It was simply vengeance, nothing else."
"I understand that, but I do not understand what it is that galvanizes you in this manner."
"But, monsieur, it is very natural," returned Bertuccio, "since it was in this house that my vengeance was accomplished."
"What, my house?"
"Oh, your Excellency, it was not yours then."
"Whose then? The Marquis de Saint-Méran?" "I think," the concierge said. "What had you to revenge on the Marquis de Saint-Méran?"
"Oh, it was not on him, monsieur, it was on another."
"That is strange," returned Monte Cristo, seeming to yield to his reflections, "that you should find yourself without any preparation in a house where the event happened that causes you so much remorse."
"Monsieur," said the steward, "it is fatality, I am sure. First you purchase a house at Auteuil. This house is the one where I have committed an assassination. You descend to the garden by the same staircase by which he descended. You stop at the spot where he received the blow, and 2 paces farther in the grave in which he had just buried his child. This is not chance, for chance in this case is too much like Providence."
"Well, amiable Corsican, let us suppose it is Providence. I always suppose anything people please, and, besides, you must concede something to diseased minds. Come, collect yourself and tell me all."
"I have related it but once, and that was to the Abbé Busoni. Such things," continued Bertuccio, shaking his head, "are only related under the seal of confession."
"Then," said the Count, "I refer you to your confessor. Turn châtre or Trappist, and relate your secrets. But as for me, I do not like anyone who is alarmed by such phantasmas, and I do not choose that my servants should be afraid to walk in the garden of an evening. I confess I am not very desirous of a visit from the commissary of police, for in Italy justice is only paid when silent. In France she is paid only when she speaks. Peste! I thought you somewhat Corsican, a great deal smuggler, and an excellent steward, but I see you have other strings to your bow. You are no longer in my service, Monsieur Bertuccio."
"Oh, your Excellency, your Excellency!" cried the steward, struck with terror at this threat. "If that is the only reason I cannot remain in your service, I will tell all, for if I quit you it will only be to go to the scaffold."
"That is different," replied Monte Cristo. "But if you intend to tell an untruth, reflect it were better not to speak at all."
"No, monsieur, I swear to you, by my hopes of salvation, I will tell you all, for the Abbé Busoni himself only knew a part of my secret. But, I pray you, go away from that plane tree. The moon is just bursting through the clouds, and there, standing where you do,
and wrapped in that cloak that conceals your figure, you remind me of Monsieur de Villefort." "What?" cried Monte Cristo. "It was Monsieur de Villefort?" "Your Excellency knows him?" "The former royal attorney at Nîmes?" "Yes." "Who married the Marquis of Saint-Méran's daughter?" "Yes." "Who enjoyed the reputation of being the most severe, the most upright, the most rigid magistrate on the bench?" "Well, monsieur," said Bertuccio, "this man, with this spotless reputation—" "Well?" "Was a villain." "Bah!" replied Monte Cristo. "Impossible." "It is as I tell you." "Really?" said Monte Cristo. "Have you proof of this?" "I had it." "And you have lost it. How stupid!" "Yes, but by careful search it might be recovered." "Really?" returned the Count. "Relate it to me, for it begins to interest me." And the Count, humming an air from Lucia, went to sit down on a bench, while Bertuccio followed him, collecting his thoughts. Bertuccio remained standing before him. End of chapter 43.
All right, that was a lot. That was a lot of information, I know, that got transmitted today. But thinking back to pretty much the beginning of chapter 41, did you catch the brilliant not mistake the Count made? He sees the painting of Mercedes. You know he is an emotional wreck inside, seeing that painting of Mercedes, not just looking young and fabulous, but looking like herself in her Catalan fishing village duds. And there she is, and she's beautiful, and she's looking off to sea, clearly missing Edmund, and it's just heartbreaking. And instead of saying, "Wow, your mother's gorgeous," he says, "You have a most charming mistress," to Albert. Brilliant. He could have blown everything with one chance offhand mistake. And he didn't do it. I would have totally blown that myself. I loved it. That was one of those things where my ears went bing. Oh wow, he's really, really smart. So one of the things I've been doing research on, and I do not have a conclusive statement to make on this, but I am opening it up to all of us because I'm hoping you or someone who is listening knows the answer to this. Based on the heraldry, the Count says that Fernand's family goes back to the 13th century from Provence. His mother's from Spain. And he can tell those things from the heraldry, their shield that would be put onto the door of the carriage, which the Count says is kind of important because if you want to travel around and not get stopped by customs officers, you need to have your arms posted on your carriage doors. 13th century? I thought Fernand was a cousin of Mercedes, and I thought he was also rather a poor fisherman who then went into the military to make a living, to have an income and a job and maybe move himself up out of the fishing village. 13th century France? That's not what I remembered. I don't know if Dumas is trying to telegraph, wow, he's a liar, even worse than you thought he was, or if he's trying to tell us something that we didn't really get the information on earlier on. No clue. But we do know that they now have a coat of arms and that the Count can read heraldry. I also personally just love the fact that Fernand looks older than he actually is, while Dantes looks younger. All that time in prison, yes, it aged him, yes, it made his hair silver, but it kept him out of the sun, and his skin didn't age, and he still looks really good. We can tell. Mercedes also still looks really good, which is not a surprise because she's gorgeous. But did you also notice the other dumb mistake that Fernand made? Normally, if you want to get a good look at someone, you have to sit with your back to the window so that the other person is sitting across from you and the light is shining on their face. But Fernand sat facing the window. So Dantes was able to sit in shadow. Now, that was very convenient for Dantes and very convenient for us because it absolutely makes sure that Fernand cannot identify him as Dantes. And after this first meeting, when the Count establishes his persona, Fernand could see him under bright fluorescent light, and he's going to have in his head, oh, this guy is the Count of Monte Cristo, not, this guy looks kind of familiar to me. It might take him a little bit longer to get to that point. But I can't tell. Once again, I can't tell if this was a vanity move by Fernand to try and put himself in better light so that he looks younger, looks good, or if this was just a dumb move on his part, like sitting with your back facing the door, which wouldn't be a good idea if you're in the military or, say, the Count of Monte Cristo. I also thought that Albert's comment about the Count to his father and the Count's comeback of that being the most just remark I've ever heard made about myself was interesting and important.
"Ah, father," said Albert with a smile, "it is evident you do not know the Count of Monte Cristo. He despises all honours and contents himself with those written on his passport." "That is the most just remark," replied the stranger, "I have ever heard made concerning myself."
Along with that, I also thought it was a little bit foreshadowy that Albert pulls out the men are not equal, the idea of being above the laws of society. These ideas are going to get repeated as we go on through the book, and it's interesting to have Albert lay that out for us here. Another impressive thing that I loved about these chapters, we found out that the Count memorized, Edmond Dantes memorized dates to implant into his stories of quote unquote his childhood in order to make it clear that he's 10 years younger, 9 or 10 years younger than he actually is. So that if someone tries to figure out, this guy looks like Edmond Dantes, let's see, timeline, no, that doesn't time out, it can't be him. Just like Mercedes does. And then in chapters 42 and 43, wow, just think of the groundwork that Edmond had to plan out and complete in order to pull off this one thing. And we don't even know what the whole thing is yet. We just know that he bought a house. But the house that he bought is totally freaking Bertuccio out. And I know we see these things happen over and over again with him throughout the book. We've already seen it a little bit with Ali. Now we're seeing it with Bertuccio. You have the Count being really harsh and kind of hardcore with his guys when they're freaking out over something, or when they have an issue or a problem or something that they're trying to get away from. He comes down on them pretty hard, but he's also paying them really well. And I don't know, maybe it's like a corollary to Stockholm Syndrome, but if he's nice to them all the time, it's like an adult or a parent trying to be their kid's friend instead of a person who the kid can trust, who they can go to, who they know can be the responsible party. With the Count being really strict about the kind of rules of morality and the rules of society and what you can and cannot expect of your servants. And as he says, justice in Italy works one way, justice in France works another. And I'm not going to get visited by the police because you screwed up somewhere along the line. By him coming down pretty hard and clear on those both spoken and unspoken rules of society, he sets himself up as someone who is not going to cut corners, not going to mince words, and not going to bend the law in his own favor. He's the hand of God now. He is vengeance. And as long as he's consistent about that, his guys are never going to question him, number one. But also, number two, they're going to be that much more loyal because he puts them through the ringer. We are going to hear the confession, actually more of the confession than Abbe Busoni, heard. Because Bertuccio has already said, I only told Busoni part of it, which must have made the Count's eyes bug out of their sockets. I don't think he knew that there was more to the story, but now, I guess we do. So we're going to hear Bertuccio's story next week, and it's going to be a doozy. But once he's transmitted that information to Monte Cristo, he's going to feel beholden to Monte Cristo, right? Because Monte Cristo could turn him in for whatever it is that he's done. Whether he just thinks it's a bad thing or it really is a bad thing because they joke about making a stiff and he says, yes. So that transmission of data from Bertuccio to the Count locks them together. Because if he tells that whole story and the Count says, okay, I get it. Bad Bertuccio, naughty, 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 but you can still work for me. It's like blackmail, except kind of in a good way, because he's going to now be protecting Bertuccio. That's how Bertuccio is going to feel. He's going to be protected. He's going to get paid. He's still working for the Count, which is kind of a primo job posting. And the next time something goes wrong, Bertuccio is going to be more willing to tell the Count right away. It also puts him in a situation where he's likely to keep more of the Count's secrets, although that doesn't seem to be a problem. His people so far seem really loyal, and of course, Ali can't tell anyone anyway. Yikes. But, yeah. So next week, got a lot of cool stuff going on. And before we go, I wanted to play this audio for you from Julie Davis at Forgotten Classics. She called and left several messages right as I was getting ready to go to Paris, so I've had to hold on to these for a while. But here we go. Have a listen.
Hi, Heather. It's Julie from Forgotten Classics, and also A Good Story is Hard to Find. And as so many times, your commentary has really been wonderful. And it was when you were saying that Edmund was 33 that I suddenly went, whoa, what? Hold on. Because you know me, super Catholic here, and so a Christ reference is just going to get me going like a laser. And so what that means is, of course, Edmund has been baptized, brought into new life, and so what follows that? And I was just kind of keeping that in the back of my mind, and then the chapter where Carnival ends is so beautiful, so theatrically written, and it's got all the candles alight, and they are suddenly out, and there is utter darkness. And it really resonated for me because I feel that Dumas wrote this for his readers knowing they were going to understand what happens at the end of Lent. And in case you don't know what happens at the end of Lent, I thought I'd mention it, which is Lent ends for Catholics with the Saturday Vigil Mass. So that's the Saturday evening before Easter Sunday. And in keeping with Jewish tradition, what we would think of as the end of a day, the evening of a day, when it gets dark, is their official beginning of a day. So when it gets dark on Saturday, that's the end of Saturday, and that's technically the beginning of Easter Sunday. So that's the idea of Holy Saturday, the Vigil Mass. So what they do, though, is the Mass doesn't begin until it's completely dark. And I mean, they will put out, here's the time when it's supposed to be totally dark. That's when Mass starts. So the church is completely dark. There is not one light even from outside. Everybody's packed into this church because this is when new people are brought into the church, is on the Vigil Mass. And I'm kind of getting choked up. I'm surprised. It's so evocative and vivid for me. But everybody's got a candle. And suddenly at the very back of the church in the vestibule, there's this blaze of light. And in this big container, shallow container, they have lit all the dried palm fronds from last year's Palm Sunday. And the priest, and I'll send you a link for this, the priest lights the Paschal candle, the Easter candle. And there's this huge candle with all this stuff carved on it and these pins in it that are significant, but it's the light of the church. Everybody around him, which tend to be other clergy and altar servers and things like that, they light their candles from it. And then light starts to spread because as they come through the church, everybody on the ends of the pews gets their candles lit and they pass it down. So you see the light coming and it's coming and it's coming, and you see faces starting to be illuminated around you. And it's so moving. And so you're singing. And then the priest starts to chant. And he is chanting from salvation history. So he's starting with Adam. He's going to Abraham. He's going through the prophets. And while this is going on, there's all this symbolism, of course, because for us it is symbolic of the light of Christ spreading through the world when he arises from the tomb. And it's visceral because you smell the smoke, you feel the warmth of the candle, you see the faces around you. You're trying to keep the hot wax from burning your hands. So, there's other symbolism going on there. But just after the New Testament's done, and right before they read the New Testament, they turn on all the lights. They grab all these bells and start ringing them like crazy. All the altar servers are running around grabbing things, and you're singing glory to God. And so it's a super, here we are, we're all here together, and we're in the light. And it's a wonderful, wonderful moment. And so, as I said, I'm sharing this because Dumas had to have had that in mind. And with you mentioning recently that the last chapter of the book is redemptive, or I took it that way, the last chapter of the book saves all. Surely that's what he was thinking of with this symbolism with the light. So I'm looking forward even more to seeing how Dumas echoes some of this imagery from all these references that he's tying in as we watch, hopefully, a redemption story in the end. Thanks. Bye.
All right. So that's it for this week. More soon. I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye. If you like getting free audiobooks with benefits every week, please consider supporting the show over at patreon.com/craftlit. There are rewards waiting for you beyond, the free podcast. You can also subscribe to our premium streaming audio by tapping the red lock when you are looking at the app or at the show notes at craftlit.libsyn.com/podcast. You can also sign up for a premium download subscription by following the links in the right-hand sidebar at craftlit.com. And if it's easier for you, you can always subscribe and review at iTunes and at Stitcher Radio. Like us on Facebook, support us at Patreon, and come with us on tour. For 9 years, Craftlit has been kept going by the support of you, the listener. And for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on